Welcome, everybody. This is Rates and Barrels. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Al Melchior. I, of course, am here with Eno Saris, and we're going to be talking about some deep sleepers for pitchers on this episode. So there's going to be a lot of good stuff here. And in the process of doing that, we'll talk about Eno's rankings, pitcher rankings, which are on The Athletic, have been up there for a little bit while. A little bit of methodology talk because there's a new projections system with some different methodology that I think is very cool that we need to talk about. But before we do dip into all of that, just a reminder that the draft kit is up. The fantasy baseball draft kit is out there on The Athletic. Get a subscription for just $2 a month for The Athletic. That will get you, of course, that draft kit and everything else. $2 a month for the first year. Just go to theathletic.com/rates and barrels for that awesome deal. So, let's just get right into it here and talk about some sleepers. Well, actually, before we talk about the sleepers, let's talk about how you pick your sleepers. So, I feel like maybe this is a dumb question, but they say there are no such things. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask. How much do you use your rankings to identify sleepers? Is it just simply a matter of kind of comparing where you've ranked a pitcher versus where they're coming up in ADP?
Well, one fun thing you can do. So we got these new projections out, thanks to Jordan Rosenblum. And the cool thing about them is that they're park adjusted and they include aging. And then they use Stuff and Pitching Plus to modify three key areas, maybe four. One is strikeout rate and walk rate. It had an effect there where we were better able to project strikeout rate and walk rate if we had stuff and location there. That's no big surprise. I think that makes a lot of sense. You're like, oh, he has good stuff. He's putting good locations. Eventually, he'll get a good strikeout rate and good walk rate, right? So that's part of why stuff and location beat strikeout minus walks in small samples, because you're just looking at the very process of they're undergoing. But when we looked at it, stuff and location actually affected the batting average on balls in play projection, which is, I think, kind of new and exciting and interesting and possibly salacious, depending on what crews you run in. So I don't want to say that dips is dead. That's going too far. That's the idea that pitchers have no control over what happens in the balls in play. But I will say that our model suggests that they do have some control over balls in play. So that was interesting. And then we also projected barrels. We projected barrels allowed, which is something is not necessarily normally in my bag of tricks. I don't normally look at barrels allowed for pitchers. Because it seems so noisy, but it is important. If you allow barrels, you're allowing power, and it might be a way to better project home runs, because what we have found in the past is home runs per nine become meaningful or stabilize or give you enough sample in 3 seasons. It's like 2.5 seasons before you know a pitcher's true talent home run per nine. And that is way too long to wait in fantasy baseball or in any baseball. So if we can better project barrels, then we can better project home runs, and we have a better sense of what a pitcher's true talent home run ability is. So we got this projected sheet with a projected ERA that's park adjusted, age adjusted, and all that. And one thing that you can do pretty easily is, because we also have projected ERA from different types of models on the sheet, you can just do a simple one minus the other in a category, and that'll bring up the pitchers that the model likes more and less. So you could take, if you're in the Google sheet, there's projected ERA in the main model. That's the first line. And you could take a projected ERA with BABIP neutral and just do one minus the other, and you'd see where our model diverges the most from other models. You could throw in a projected ERA from Fangraphs or Steamer and do the same way. But that's an interesting thing that I've done in the past to identify who I like more than the group. I mean, sometimes it gets complicated because of innings. and every place you look has a different innings projection for different players. And that's the one place where I did try to put in Jeff Zimmerman's like injury percentiles, but I feel like that's guesswork.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you can adjust for on the fly. You can have that data handy and say, well, I think maybe there's a better chance that this player stays healthy, or I just take the gamble that the player stays healthy than say Jeff would predict. So that's a whole issue unto itself, is how we make data draft.
Yeah.
But at least it's there. And, for me, this is exciting, and it's good news slash bad news, because the way that I've gone about identifying pitching sleepers, and especially today, we're looking at some of the deeper sleepers. The way that I've gone about that is kind of zigging where the community zags, because as you said in the outset of your description of this methodology, that there's a large swath of our community that, doesn't look at BABIP, or that doesn't look at a history of barrel rates, or something I have looked at a lot the last few years is trends in average exit velocity on flies and liners for pitchers. And there are certain pitchers who do very, very consistently well in that metric, and pitchers who do very consistently poorly in that metric. And
it's something that is meaningful for batters, right? Like average exit velocity on flies and liners is very meaningful. It's why barrels works.
Exactly. So it's just looking at really one component of that. Obviously, it doesn't take the launch angle component into account, but that's
it does by saying on flyers and liners. It does kind of,
good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And on some of the pitchers we're going to talk about, we might get a little bit more granular. Instead of talking about a ground ball profile, talk about a low grounder profile, because that actually makes a difference. But yeah, not to get too nitpicky about it. The bigger point for me here is that having a model that incorporates these things that I'm going to call contact management. I know there are people who don't like that term, who actually don't even believe it's necessarily a thing.
Exactly.
I don't know where you fall.
Bit.
Yeah. So based on what you said, I'm guessing you're not going to take too much of an issue with me using that label of contact managers.
I mean, I was born in dips. Like that's where I started. I started with FIP. I started on Fangraphs. I started with the belief that if I just followed strikeouts and walks, I would do well. And that did serve me well, but there's always kind of like the Michael Pineda types,
Yes.
where you just, and Ricky Nolasco was another guy where you just had these great strikeout minus walk totals and then huge home run totals. And there's been lots of different ways to explain it. People have tried to approach it in different ways, but I think that's either a failure of stuff or location, and that by better putting a number on stuff and location, we can better figure out the process and figure out what processes lead to these. You can mess up and give up a homer by locating it middle. That's a failure of location. You can mess up and hang your breaking ball, and that could be a failure of location or of shape, and hanging a breaking ball in particular is rough, because if you throw your fastball middle, at least it goes 90 something. If you throw your breaking ball middle, now it's 80 something. So, there's all this sort of interaction of stuff and location that could lead to batters hitting you better.
Absolutely. And I like your Pineda example. I also thought of Kyle Hendricks. He was somebody that I just would be drafting a lot every year up until a couple years ago.
Because when they hit him hard.
Right. And that's been happening more often than not the last couple of seasons, but long stretch for him of being a consistently good. And again, I'm going to use the term contact manager. So providing myself with that segue, let's start talking about some possible deep sleepers here in the contact management group. So in other words, saying that they may fall under the radar of your fellow league mates because maybe they're just mediocre as a strikeout pitcher, but they're going to help you in ERA and WHIP and wins, perhaps because they're just really good at minimizing the damage that batters do when they connect off of them. So let's start this discussion with Kyle Bradish. And some of these categorizations, lumping him as a contact manager maybe doesn't make the best sense, but I will put him here because he was a completely different pitcher when he came back from a shoulder injury in the second half last season, put up a 3.28 ERA. And he did it. I mean, he would fit this model really well, you know, a 5.0% barrel rate over those second half starts and a 253 BABIP rate. Now, I'm very suspicious about first of all, I should be suspicious about both of these because it's a really small sample. But the barrel rate, especially, he gave up on batted fly and line drives 94.1 miles an hour. That's hard contact. So I'm not sure he'd be able to sustain that barrel rate, but you know, maybe he'd be somebody who could be helpful in whip because he can control the damage done on balls in play.
Yeah, I think there's some risk if his price inflates that I won't be in as hard. But the model says he has above average stuff. And I think that part of the reason why I'm at all nervous about him is I think the four seam fastball is not great. And I think that's when he gets into trouble. I think that's the pitch that allows the barrels. That's the pitch that gets him in trouble. And early in the season, he was trying to establish with the four seam. And what you can see when you look at his pitching mix is that he really dialed down the four seam usage and started establishing with the slider. And the slider is his best pitch by any metric. He commands it the best. It's the best stuff. And this is the kind of league now where you can establish with the slider instead of the fastball. He now, I think, uses the four seam more as a whiff pitch high in the zone. If he misses with it, that's the 94 mile an hour, line drive, fly ball, exit velocity there. But he now has, 5 pitches that he can mix around. And the idea of establishing with the slider, I think, is good too, because he doesn't command his sinker that well. He kind of went to the sinker more than the four seam, but he doesn't command it as well. So this idea that if I need a strike, I can throw a slider, and I can use my four seam and sinker as action pitches, I think is a really interesting one. It's a kind of a newer one. I mean, people call it pitching backwards, but it's to throw more sliders, or to throw as many sliders as he does, or he did late in the season where he's throwing 30-40% sliders. That is something new in today's league. And I think it'll serve him well. Plus the ballpark changes served him well. And I think generally there's a lot to like here. Anybody who has like an elite slider that they can locate, I'm already sort of in the tank on them. I'm like, that could be like, if you need one thing. People used to think you need a great fastball you can locate. I think the new league is, do you have a great slider you can locate?
Sure. And then that also increases your potential for whiffs and strikeouts, which we love in fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go to a teammate on the Orioles, and that's Tyler Wells, who got off to a really nice start last year. And I don't think he has that same strikeout potential, but I think that he fits even more in this mold of somebody who could really be a cheap source of low whip, because he does get a lot of those high flies, a lot of easy pop outs. And so, the strikeouts are probably not going to be there. But another concern too is, do you think Wells is going to make a decent number of starts this year? Is there room for him in that rotation? And if he gets that opportunity, do you like his chances to perform well enough to be helpful?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, the one kind of soft argument I have, it's like soft science argument I have, is that they just sort of nurtured Tyler Wells. They nursed him through a season, right? There was a lot of careful work when it came to his innings, in terms of, early on it was 80 pitches and he couldn't go past 80. It was kind of the Tampa Bay Rays approach where, okay, it's going to be 4 innings. We don't care. We're going to give you 80 pitches and that's it. Then they pushed him a little bit, and then it got closer to 85, 100. And, he got a few wins and it looked good, but then shoulders barking and they moved him back off. That fits, I think, pretty well with his injury history in the minors. That's why they were able to get him from the Twins. And so, I just feel like, do you invest all that energy and time and attention to someone and then just say, we got Grayson Rodriguez now, like, you're out? So I kind of think maybe he's at worst a guy who's on the roster in the Keegan Aiken role. where he's 2 to 3 innings at a time behind Bradish or Kramer or Rodriguez, and that Rodriguez is going to get a similar treatment. Grayson Rodriguez, who this model loves, by the way, spit out a 3 ERA. You can't put him in your deep sleepers episode, but I have to mention that. But what if they treat Grayson Rodriguez like they treated Tyler Wells last year, and it's 80 pitches per start, and it's the Drew Rasmussen, Rays thing where he barely gets any wins, and Tyler Wells comes in and steals all his wins. Like there's still a situation in which Tyler Wells, doesn't start at the beginning of the year, but gives you 125 innings, 150 innings by the end of the season with good numbers. And he didn't strike guys out in his first approach, and there's not really the swinging strike rate to suggest very much better. I would say a little better than 6.6 K per nine. Like, an 11% strike rate suggests better than that. And then he had good strikeout rates in the minors, so I'm wondering if he's just going to improve the breaking balls. Right now, his changeup is his best secondary, and that has a lot to do with why you would have low BABIPs and low strikeout rates. That's a changeup thing. But he does throw a slider and a curveball. He locates them decently well. If those can take any step forward in terms of stuff this year, then he could be a breakout pitcher. So I think it's a decent floor pitcher that the team is going to need to use, that the model likes better. But all that adds up to more deep sleeper than like I need him. Like he's not really viable for a 12-teamer. 15-teamer, I would pick him as a bench pick and watch the early season and be like, oh, Kramer's hurt or whatever, oh, he's in the rotation, or I just got to drop him week 1 for something else. So I wouldn't invest too heavily because I think you're right. The team context is iffy.
Well, and I'm going to branch off away here from draft strategy for just a second. And I think we can talk about sleepers in a fab context too. So let's say you're drafting on the late side. That Orioles rotation picture is crystallizing. It seems pretty clear that Wells is going to have maybe that vulture role that you were talking about. Yeah. And, if that appears to be the case, and you talk about monitoring his pitch mix, at what point, how much do you need to see from Tyler Wells or any pitcher for that matter before you say, hey, I think this is somebody who's going to have an opportunity for a more prominent role, or to be really great in that limited role where, he might have some usefulness? How many do you need to see? 2 starts, 4 starts?
There's one complication. So what if he is in the pen and he starts to air it out, right? What's going to happen is all his stuff is going to go up. That's just, we know that velo goes up when you're in the pen, and velo is a part of stuff, the adjustment is about 5 points of stuff. So if he all of a sudden comes out and has like a 120 stuff plus, you can't be like, well, he's going to be awesome. He's going to be, he's going to slide right in and be an ace. You have to, subtract 5. And I think that's probably going to be true on the pitch level too. So if he comes out and is throwing right now, last year he threw a 98 stuff plus slider. If he comes out this year and throws a, like a 103 or 102 stuff plus slider out of the pen, you may not have seen much. You know what I mean? It may just be the same slider.
Yeah.
And so I would say in that situation, I would just wait and see. I would still like him if someone got hurt and they slid into the rotation and you're talking about fab, then I'd still be like someone I'd pounce on. But your other question, there's sort of more general question about like how quickly can I react to these things? I mean, especially on fastballs and breaking balls, the number of pitches to stabilization for stuff plus is on the order of like 50 to 60.
Oh, wow.
For example, I have an example here that's not necessarily a deep sleeper, but a little bit higher in the pecking order. Joe Ryan was throwing a slider last year that at the end of the year looked like a below average stuff plus for the season, right? And that's because you're aggregating all of his sliders over the course of the season. But near the end of the season, like in September, he started throwing basically a sweeper, a new kind of slider. And if you look at the monthly splits in September, he threw let me make sure that's September. In September, he threw a slider that had a 106 stuff plus. The rest of the season, it was a 93 stuff plus. Okay, so now we're talking about a 13-point difference. That is significant. And we're talking in September, he threw 20, 30, 58. He threw 100 sliders.
Yeah.
You know?
And by the way, you remind me to correct myself too, because the key unit of measurement here is number of pitches. I'm saying starts.
Right. Yeah.
Setting up a scenario where
so it does depend on like how many he
starts.
throws in each start and stuff, but
Right.
In this case for Joe Ryan, I think we knew about 3 starts in that slider was different. 3 starts into September. I mean, you're looking at how different the movement numbers are, and you can see that on Brooks. So you can see, if you look and you see, oh, the stuff plus is up, and you go over to Brooks and you're like, whoa, he just added 6 inches of horizontal movement. Like that's sort of an aha moment. That's a different pitch. And how many more do you have to see if the stuff model says it's good and there's this huge change in movement? So, that's tough to do in a really regimented way. And that's something that you can even get beyond the model in terms of finding changes like that quicker. The model is just going to look at, the full season,
Right.
So that's why it's important to sort of track differences. And if you notice someone's like, changing something, check the recent changes in the pitches. And so anyway, 3 starts can be enough.
Okay. All right. Very good to know. Good guideline to have. Well, let's talk about a pitcher who I think we could include this category of being a contact manager, but in a very, very different way than Wells or Bradish. And that is the Reds, Graham Ashcraft, ground ball pitcher. What's your thoughts on him heading into the season? Is he worth targeting just a little harder than maybe some others?
I've been really making sure to get him in my draft and holds. I think I've had 2 NFBC draft and holds so far and have him in both. And the reason is that he's in the rotation. He should be useful no matter what on the road. And there's going to be a lot of weeks in Pittsburgh and cold Wrigley and stuff where I think he could be a good matchups pitcher just without any advancement. There's an interesting thing that happened in the model where we used to count cutters as breaking balls, and he didn't look that good in the model. But you watch him and you're like, man, he throws a 97-mile-an-hour cutter as his primary pitch. Like, are we sure this model is capturing this correctly? When we threw cutters in with fastballs, he took a real big leap. And so now he has a 114 stuff plus cutter now and a 113 stuff plus slider. I think that's a really interesting combo that we don't see a lot of. And so I can't say that I put the rubber stamp of approval and got to rank him 50th or whatever, like he's still in the back end of my 80s, back end top 100, especially with that park. When we park adjusted his model numbers, he went from like a 3.5, true talent guy to someone who had like a 4.1 ERA. That's a really tough park. It's a bottom 3 park for pitchers. But it's also an interesting foundation where what if he did add one more pitch? Like what if he added a changeup, or what if he added a curve, and went cutter, slider, curve? Like he seems like he's good at shaping the ball that way, at breaking balls. What if that was the ticket forward for him? I have an old article from him where he's talking to Kyle Bodie about improving his curveball. So he has a curveball in there that he doesn't throw anymore. So what if that comes out? So anyway, I just think that anybody with a 97-mile-an-hour cutter like that deserves attention, and that's basically, sometimes it's as simple as that. Like, I really like this one pitch this guy has, and he's super cheap. I mean, that's good enough for deep sleepers sometimes.
All right. Well, let's go to a pitcher that may not, at least initially, have a rotation spot, but you've got him relatively high in your rankings, and that's Hayden Wesneski. What is it that you like about him?
I think this sort of one pitch thing has been really an undercurrent for all this, right? We had Wells as the changeup, and that'll lead to lower strikeouts, but managing contact. Bradish was the slider. Ashcraft is the cutter, and Wesneski is the sweeper. And that's what we were talking about with Ryan. Is this? It's a seam shifted wake pitch that moves differently than batters expect. And what it actually does is it looks like a slurve, but it stays on one plane. It's slower than a cutter, but it's got that kind of movement. So it's a sideways breaking ball that's more effective at like 85 and 86 and 87. But it's a sideways breaking ball that doesn't drop as much as the batters expect, and they swing under it because they see slider spin and then doesn't quite get slider drop. So Wesneski's is pretty good. He's got a 114 stuff plus on that, and he actually commands it well. That can be a difficulty. Mitch Keller added the sweeper and had to figure out how to command it. What is also exciting about Wesneski is that he already comes blessed with an above average sinker and an above average cutter. And that's, I think, a combination sinker, cutter, slider that we are actually going to see more of. It actually harkens back to, I remember Justin Masterson as a guy that I was like, oh, sinker, slider, like it can work. It can work. I promise it can work. Those are ones that have bad platoon splits, but the cutter has the other way platoon splits, and that replaces the changeup in our traditional, fastball, slider, changeup approach to starting pitching. So cutter, slider, sinker is the new fastball, slider, changeup. Matt Brash is trying to put that together. I think we're going to see more and more of this, especially with the sweeper, because the sweeper has big platoon splits. So you got the sweeper for one side, the cutter for the other side, and you have to have a good fastball. Wesneski has those three things. I think he actually threw his changeup and four seam too much, given their numbers. If we see a slight alteration of the pitch mix, we could see another step. Even the way he produced when he was on the field is good. And I don't see anything. It's a little bit like Johan Oviedo in Pittsburgh. Johan Oviedo and Adrian Sampson in Chicago are guys that are in the way of more exciting guys. Mm-hmm. In Chicago, I'm a little bit more sure that they're just going to be like, hey, we're going to try and win. Like Adrian Sampson, thank you very much. You're going to be up when someone's hurt, but Hayden Wesneski is a little bit more exciting. So we're going to use this guy. In Pittsburgh, maybe they slow walk it, but Pittsburgh has otherwise this offseason worked as a team that seems to have a little bit of, what is it? They want to get better. They want to win more games. Like you don't sign Carlos Santana and G-Man Choi and some of these like smaller deals. You don't bring Kutch back, on these smaller deals unless you're actually trying to win more games. And if I'm in Pittsburgh, Luis Ortiz wins me more games than Johan Oviedo. So that's my theory on Wesneski, is that his talent will out and he will make the opening day rotation.
All right. Well, we will find out in just a few weeks.
It is a bit of a gamble still. So this is why we're still in the deep sleeper territory.
Exactly. And why his ADP is still low.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go to one more pitcher here. Wasn't really sure where to categorize Nick Martinez, but I've included him in this category because last season with the Padres, a 0.276 BABIP rate, although that was really more line drive rate driven, which to me, that's very variable. So I don't know that I didn't see anything in the profile that suggested that that's something that Martinez can sustain. I wonder if he fits this pattern, though, of, having the one really good pitch. He went to his changeup a lot more last season than when he did back when he was with the Rangers, had a good whiff rate with it. So is that part of the appeal for you with Martinez?
I'm checking his four-seam fastball stuff plus over the season. Because he changed roles. And I want to see if his overall numbers are inflated by that. Yeah, I mean, when he was a starter, his four-seam fastball looked, I think, maybe below average. It hopped up a little bit game to game, but there were some games in there with 87 stuff plus and 85 stuff plus on the four-seam. So I think as a starter, he's a little bit less exciting. But I think he's kind of an ideal draft and hold guy because he does have these 4 or 5 pitches. I do think his changeup is his best pitch. But the cutter is decent. And in relief, the four seam is enough. As a starter, he's got to really mix his pitches. I don't know. I think then in certain matchups, he's good. I don't want to throw him against the Dodgers, but like in Arizona, in San Francisco, against those teams in San Diego, there's going to be matchups I like him in for sure. I kind of think he'll be, it'd be an interesting guy is there's a line where this might be a little bit NFBC centric, but I think there's a lot of leagues like this where you've got someone who's a little bit better than streaming, and you don't know whether you should drop him for a streamer or just keep him on your roster in the weeks you don't want to start him, you know? I think Paul Sporer calls them team streamers. I think Nick Martinez is likely to be someone like that, because I don't see something in the profile where I'm like, I want to throw this guy against the Dodgers.
Yeah. Well, again, not something you would probably say about many deep sleepers anyway.
Right.
So yeah. not a knock against him in this company for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to another category of pitchers that could be going later than maybe they should. Maybe because of the teams that they're on. There were 3 pitchers in each of the Tigers rotation and the A's rotation that were a little bit higher in your rankings than I would have expected, and higher than you would expect based on their current ADP. So let's start with the Tigers pitchers. So we've got Spencer Turnbull, of course, returning from Tommy John surgery, already hitting 94 miles an hour with his fastball. In spring training, we've got Matthew Boyd returning to the Tigers after a brief relief stint with the Mariners last year, and then Mike Lorenzen coming over from the Angels. So a trio of pitchers that you seem to like.
Yeah. The one thing that I struggle with here is that Detroit is changing the park dimensions. And I'm trying to get right here. The first big change, the center field wall is going to 412, and they're lowering the right center field wall. And it's going to be a little bit more pitcher friendly. The reason I mention that is I think that the reason why those pitchers pop in the model a little bit is the park factor.
Okay. Oh, okay. Which obviously should change this year. Although it was interesting because I was reading recently about that change in park dimensions and how, they want to give Riley Green an opportunity to show off his defensive skills. I mean, I'm not sure how much that actually did play into it, but you can certainly.
I think I think what you're seeing is Scott Bush coming from they're going to say all sorts of things. I mean, that I think they had Matt Boyd being like, well, if I give up a deep fly, then it should be a home run or whatever. And it's like he doesn't believe that really. But anyway, Scott Bush came over from San Francisco, and I think San Francisco made a lot of the changes too. And they said it was for bullpen, it was for player safety, and the bullpens, were on the field, and someone actually did get hurt. I think it was Mac Williamson, fell on the bullpen mound and got a concussion against the wall. So there was some aspect of that was true. However, what the upshot of it was that San Francisco was not quite the extreme pitcher's park that it was in the past. And so it makes it a little bit more appealing for hitters. It makes it a little bit less of a problem for Mitch Haniger and Michael Conforto to sign these deals to come to San Francisco, because it's not quite as extreme as it was in the past. Mm-hmm. I think most teams are doing this where they're trying to make the park more uniform and more average so that they can attract any sort of sleeper or free agent they want. If you cut yourself off from any sort of population, then that just doesn't want to sign with you. Like, for example, imagine trying to scour the free agent market for pitchers as a Rockies front office person. Yeah,
well, they've not had a ton of success
in
that regard.
It also means that you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, because there is no pitcher that is like, I remember how often Brandon McCarthy would just be talking about something and he would just start talking about how bad Colorado was.
Just randomly out of the blue.
Yeah. So I don't think there's any pitcher that really wants to sign in Colorado unless they add like $5 million to the package, or they're the only team calling. So
yeah, no, they're not
big buyers. I do think you bring up something interesting too with Turnbull. Hitting 94 when he used to sit 94 is not quite ideal, because usually you want to hit about two miles per hour over where you're going to sit.
Well, but it's February.
Yes. Yeah. And I did have one pitcher tell me that, before he attends spring training, he was somebody that would hit like 93, 94. I would sit 93, 94 during the season. And before he got to spring training, he wanted to sit like 88. So that means at the very beginning, you're talking about if he's already hitting 94, that means he's sitting 92. like it's totally plausible that he gets another 2 ticks over the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, I took that as an encouraging sign.
Yeah.
To get this early. I mean, obviously, if we're getting into mid to late March, that's a whole different thing. So anybody in that rotation, and I mean, I've mentioned 3 that were ranked pretty high relative to ADP, but I mean, is there anybody in that rotation that you don't worry about, even with the park changes?
No, it's going to be really interesting to track because none of the pitchers are rated very highly. And in fact, the model was a little bit pessimistic on, guys that the prospect community liked, like Matt Manning, Casey Mize, and Turek Skubal. But Skubal, I think, really changed his pitch mix and improved his lot in life. And so I guess I like him the best. Or him and Turnbull, I guess I like them the best coming into this season, with the asterisk that health is a question for both, health and innings.
Right, exactly.
And I guess that same asterisk is true for Eduardo Rodriguez.
Oh, yeah.
He's the kind of guy that just survives on command and multiple pitches. And I think in a pitcher's park, that's fine. In a hitter's park, it's a little bit less fine. I don't know if it'll switch all the way to being a hitter's park, but then he had just such an awfully bizarre season last year with being away from the team and just we don't even really know what happened. I don't know how many innings to give him either. So I guess I would say I like Eduardo Rodriguez, Spencer Turnbull, and Terry Skubal some, but they might average 120 innings.
All right. Well, let's shift on over to the A's, and of course, a team that I know that you know especially well. And I picked up on a trio of pitchers there too that were ranked higher than I would have expected. And of course, we're all very interested in what you see with Shintaro Fujinami, who has not yet pitched in the majors. Drew Rucinski coming back to the majors after some time in the KBO. And also I want to talk about Paul Blackburn too, because I got a little excited about Blackburn early on last season. A little bit. He wasn't, I won't say he was a good strikeout pitcher, but Blackburn was always somebody who really had very, very low strikeout whiff rates and just relied almost entirely on ground balls. And he got to a point where he was a decent strikeout pitcher, getting more whiffs on at least a couple of his pitches. So, I mean, I guess we could open it up to the whole rotation, but especially with those 3 rather being ranked a little bit higher than one might expect. Who excites you in this rotation?
Fujinami is someone that's interesting to me. I think Blackburn is like I don't know, he's the prototypical, but he's in the family, the Hunjin Ryu family of, I have 5 pitches and I do my best when I control all of them and try to surprise you with each of them. The cutter is really the only one that rates well by Stuff Plus. So he's always going to be dancing around that cutter a little bit. But he does throw 6 pitch types, according to Savant. And he had above average command on 5 of them. So that is his game. And I'm cool with that at home. And I think the 3.99 projected pitching plus projected ERA is sort of indicative of that. That's probably like a 4.3, 4.4 away and a 3.7 at home. So like I'm going to be trying to use him at home the most. Fujinami, I think, is a wild card, and honestly, the ERA projection in there is just a traditional model one because we don't have stuff and location on him. But I've been watching him for a long time, and he has stuff. So my guess is he's like a 108 stuff plus 97 location plus guy, which means he's right on the border where the command will make him a reliever. That's exactly the story that was told in Japan, where he was up and down, sometimes starter, sometimes reliever, always a lot of really bad command years. His most recent last 2 years, better command. And I think there's something about the American approach that might do well for him. So like, for example, if his teams were always asking him to establish with the fastball and use the slider and the splitter for action, right? And he doesn't have great fastball command. He could easily come over here and they'd be like, man, you command that slider pretty well. Just throw that in the counts where you need a strike, use the fastball, which is 99, and this awesome splitter otherwise. So he's the highest stuff guy in that rotation. The rest of the rotation, other than Waldachuk, is mostly command guys. So okay. I think that's why I'm excited about him. A high stuff guy in a park like that. I think that's worth. And they promised him a spot in the rotation. Like his GM already said, we promised him a spot in the rotation. He's in the top 3 in the rotation. Everybody else is fighting for 4 and 5.
So that's obviously a big plus. Do you think that he will have 12-team appeal at some point this season?
That's a little bit of a wait and see. But the nice thing is that with a model like Stuff Plus, like we'll know fairly early on, 2 starts in, we're going to know if he does actually have good shape on his fastball and if the Stuff Plus is good, and how the Location Plus takes a little bit longer, but you could do some eye scouting too, where you're just watching the games and seeing how well you think he's commanding the ball. But he's going to get more chances than that, and he does have the upside. Rucinski, I think, is Blackburn and Irvin-esque, where he's just going to be someone we want to use at certain times, but he was listed in the top 3 too. In order to sign Rucinski and Fujinami, the GM had to promise them spots in the rotation. Okay. So that's part of why I'm higher on them the most, because I'm like, dude, they're in the rotation in Oakland. I'm always interested. I mean, they turned Cole Irvin and Paul Blackburn, people I would not have put on any sleeper list, into very usable pitchers last year.
Yeah, no, I know I wrote at least one thing last year recommending Irvin as a streamer. So that's, definitely not something we would have foreseen a few years ago. So let's talk going from a team where, you mentioned a couple of pitchers that have pretty much guaranteed rotation spots, and there's probably not enough depth to really have us worry about them getting pushed out, to a Marlins rotation. I know some people might actually take issues with the Marlins being categorized here as a lesser team, but there's certainly a lot of pitching depth there. You've got Yuri Perez on the way. I noticed that on Fangraphs that they do not have Braxton Garrett projected in that starting rotation. And I can understand why, but I just thought what he did last year was so impressive. And he really excelled at a couple of indicators that I look at a lot. His CSW, which is called in swinging strikes combined, almost 31%, 30.8%. That's outstanding. And a whiff rate or O-swing rate on out of zone pitches, 37.0%. That's also pretty much an elite figure. So does he somehow work his way into the rotation, or do you maybe just have enough doubts about Trevor Rogers holding down the spot? How do you see that playing out for Garrett?
Yeah, Garrett's a little bit in the Blackburn school where he's got 5 pitches that rate by Stuff Plus between 85 and 96. So nothing that's above average, but 5 fairly good ones. And it's possible we're missing something on the slider, because it's an 84-mile-an-hour slider with 2-plane Blake that, looks kind of like a baby curve. So I don't know why it's bad in our model. Sometimes I get frustrated by that, where I'm just like, I don't know why. So if we're undervaluing his slider, then he does have an out pitch. He has 4 other pitches he can command, and he pitches in a great park. That's part of why I like him. The other part is Jesus Luzardo does not stay healthy. Eduardo Cabrera does not really stay healthy. Trevor Rogers does not really stay healthy. And Johnny Cueto is the other guy. Right. Like, I'm not saying that Johnny Cueto has been really that rough health-wise, but he has not only sort of potential collapse by just being old and in terms of quality of pitching, but just as you get older, the health risk goes up. So I think that's a fairly risky health-wise rotation behind Sandy Alcantara. And I just think Braxton Garrett, I could easily see him stepping in before the end of spring training. Because it's 6 weeks. What's the likelihood that one of those 4 guys gets hurt in 6 weeks? I think is like 70%.
Yeah. And do you think that there's some long-term potential there that he would, given that opportunity, he would pitch well enough to withstand some of the promotions that would likely be coming during the season?
Yeah, that's another question. I mean, I do believe in Yuri Perez. Sixto Sanchez has a new body. And Sixto Sanchez used to throw 100-mile-an-hour sinker with a devastating change. So there's a lot of moving parts there. But, they're always trying to trade pitching for hitting, and they could just keep that train going, really.
Yeah.
I don't know that I want Braxton Garrett if he ends up in New York. I will say that.
All right. Fair enough there. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to toss out one more pitcher in this category. And it was somebody I thought of late because I had just written about him in my latest piece for The Athletic on the top 10 players that gained value in the off season. And I think that the move for Ryne Yarbrough from the Rays to the Royals is something that helps him, even though the Royals say that they may use him in that similar swingman type of role. I just see him as having less depth to contend with and probably a better chance of pitching more innings with the Royals. Also a pretty good ballpark, at least from the perspective of avoiding home runs. And Yarbrough, for me, could have easily included him in the first category as well, because he's been one of the best pitchers actually in the majors over the span of his career at limiting hard contact on flies and liners. Hasn't always shown up in his final stats, but I like this situation for Yarbrough.
Yeah. I think that he does have contact management as a skill. It shows up in good curveball stuff plus, and then good cutter location plus. So he locates his cutter real well, works off that cutter with the curveball, and then manage. A changeup and sinker are also going to provide you low launch angles if you use them right. So that all four of his pitches really are designed to have low launch angles, and he doesn't have like 60% ground balls, but he does, I think, limit the barrels, and I believe that is a skill of his. The one thing is, it's funny to say this about a guy who throws 80 poo, but I think every mile per hour counts. So I would want to know what he was throwing, and it seems ridiculous to say that about somebody. Like, is he throwing 88? Is he cracking 90? But I think he is so much better if he is averaging 88, 89 than when he's averaging 87. It's something that the research found too, which is that there's a band in the middle. And this research was done a long time ago, where it found that, between 90 and 93 or so, there wasn't that much difference between gaining a tick or losing a tick in fastball velocity, because that was kind of the hitting range. Right. Mm-hmm. That's where batters were training to hit, between 90 and 93. And that research found that over 94 and over, the fastball started to perform so much better in terms of swinging strikes and home runs allowed and stuff. I believe that that's probably even higher now, as 93.5 or 93.9 was the average fastball in baseball last year. So it might take, averaging 96 to kind of start getting those results on the fastball. But that also suggests that maybe the bottom range is higher. So maybe you really want to be above 91 or something to really avoid what happened on the other end, where home runs go up and whiffs go down. So he's living on the edge at 87 miles an hour. I do love the park. I wonder if I could make him my final pick or a reserve in AL Labor, like a mono league reserve or a final pick in a draft and hold, because he's going to pitch. There's going to be innings. You could manage those innings in that park. You could manage those innings against certain divisional opponents, and I think you would do well for it. Yeah.
Kind of wish
it's about the deepest cut we could get. I feel like the guy throwing 87,
right? But to get back to the schedule too, with for his sake, I do wish there was the unbalanced schedule, because that would be a huge upgrade for him getting out of the AL East. But
you're getting a ton of Cleveland in Kansas City. I would like that.
Yeah. Well, he's probably going to get that. So let's go to one final category of pitchers, and that is rookie/prospects. And Andrew Painter, pretty high on your list, and for obvious reasons. I think the only question is just how much of the season does he pitch in the major leagues? But is he somebody that you think would be worth stashing in 12 teamers? I think the answer is yes to 15 team. If you think there's some controversy there, certainly address that. But where could he be stashed, do you think?
I think he can be stashed anywhere. I think the amount of leash you have changes a lot. What you're doing is you're stashing him and saying he's going to win that fifth starter role. He's up against Bailey Falter, Mick Abel. I don't think he's actually up against that much. But he could do poorly in the spring and not get that role. Or they could decide to manage his service time or his innings or whatever it is and send him down. Then that's when the real intrigue happens. I think it's, in a 12 team. So I'll just get somebody that made the rotation. I'll just, there's going to be one of the final pitchers on your 12 team squad. You just keep moving, just keep moving. 15 team. Do they send him down and say he's going to be, it's just to manage that first run through the rotation and like he'll be back up soon when the fifth starter role, like we're just going to skip the fifth starter role for a little bit. And when we need him, he'll be back up. Then I might try to nurse him on those 15 teamers for just a little bit longer. Cause I do think he has ace type upside. Everyone talks about how hard his fastball is, how great his breaking ball is. There's some debate about whether or not his fastball has good plane, good shape, but he's also 6'7", and releasing from a pretty high release point. So you add that with the velo, and I think it might perform well, even if Stuff Plus doesn't say it's the most amazing pitch. So I'm pretty into Painter, and I would definitely take him as a speculative ad, especially if I can do it in the bench rounds.
All right. And I just want to come back to Luis Ortiz because you did talk about him earlier, but just want to give you an opportunity to expand on him if there's more to say, because you did talk about the fact that you think the Pirates are getting closer to I will win now is probably not realistic, but more of a winning mode than they've been in a while. What else is there to like about?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Luis Ortiz doesn't have anything to work on. He came up and was really wowed with a 96 mile/hour fastball with unique shape. It's almost a little bit Wood Ruffian, where it has horizontal and vertical movement. And then he's got a power slider that's ridiculous and a really good changeup. I mean, he's a power pitcher with power stuff, but the locations weren't good. And so it's easy enough to say, hey, kid, like, let's start the year AAA and work on your locations. And we'll put Vince Velasquez and Rich Hill in this rotation to start the year, and just have a credible veteran squad at the major league level while we wait for you. That's, I think, probably the most likely outcome. But just like we were just saying with like Florida, Rich Hill, Vince Velasquez oft injured. Roinzy Contreras lost like 2.5 miles an hour on his fastball over the course of last season. So that's a big question mark for me in terms of, was that a harbinger of injury? Like, what was going on there? Mm-hmm. And so I think, and then I just like Luis Ortiz a lot more than Johan Oviedo. So I think Johan Oviedo is like I said, the Adrian Sampson like plug and play role where you keep him while he has options. I don't see much upside beyond that. And then Luis Ortiz is Roinzy Contreras, Luis Ortiz, and either Burrows or Priester. That's when we're going to be really rocking. Those are our studs in the future. So I don't know. You're right. It's not quite the same as Chicago. I think the Cubs have more pressure on them to start winning games. Their front office group, I think, has more pressure on them to start winning games. They talk about wanting to win games. They've been making more significant acquisitions.
Right. Yeah. You don't go out and get Dansby Swanson if you're not trying to make a move. Exactly.
So they're a little bit closer. That's why Wesneski is going to be higher on my list than Ortiz.
All right. And Ryne Nelson is somebody that you really like. I think the Diamondbacks are going to be a fun, interesting team this year. What is it about Nelson that you like?
Yeah, Nelson is one of the guys that the model likes much more than a BABIP and Stuff Plus neutral model. He's one of the top 40 in terms of the difference between the two models. He's still only projected for a 4.08 PPERA, but to me, it's a little bit of a play against Jameson. Dre Jameson has a 4.2 ERA in the model, does not have the same stuff according to the model, And there's going to be a winner or loser there. And I'm staking my flag with Ryne Nelson. He's got a good four seam with great hop to it. I think he could use the secondaries more for more whiffs. He did that in the minors. He had more whiffs in the minors. So I think he's just sneaky good.
Yeah, well, that's interesting what you said too about him not doing as well in the BABIP neutral model, because to me he could have a very similar statistical profile to Wells, probably with more strikeouts. But to me that's a good thing. So I like that call as well.
Fastballs with hop are going to have lower BABIPs because they create pop-ups.
Exactly. Yeah. So I like that profile, and it's typical of a pitcher that typically does get underrated. So anybody else, that I've left off this list that you think people should definitely be tucking away?
I gotta save a little leg for my my deep sleepers piece that's coming out tomorrow. But we did talk about a lot of them actually, so I'm gonna save the rest of my leg for that. I guess one guy that I do like that the model just loves the heck out of, but has a bunch of asterisks, is DL Hall. And it's interesting because the first time we ran the model, it didn't love him as much. But as we've made improvements, he had a 112 projected stuff plus. And despite all the talk of how bad his locations were, his projected location plus is 101. So that's really not that bad. That could be a starting pitcher. This does use his reliever stats though. So 112, you got to take that 5 off, and it's 107. But who he's right next to a guy, Zach Gallen, who has a 107 stuff plus, in terms of difference between the models. So 3.3 projected PPRA, like
you take that.
If he's a starter and it's 3.8, or if he's a reliever, like Bautista's leg is hurt, right? Like what if he just takes over as closer? So like he has elite stuff, and so it's like, what's the role and how much am I going to pay to find out what that role is?
Yeah. Well, there's upside in at least a couple of those potential roles. So sort of like
worst case is just Keegan Aiken again.
Yeah. We'll save the rest for your column, so people should definitely be looking for that. And in the meantime, if you've got questions for us, of course you can find us on Twitter. Eno is at Enoceris. I'm at Al Melchior BB. You can also reach out to us by email, ratesandbarrels, of course, and spelled out, ratesandbarrels @gmail.com. Or ask in the comment section under this video on YouTube. Lots of ways to catch us, and also the comments on our columns as well. So next up for us is going to be, I know you're very, very excited about this, yes, Lars Nootbaar, you interviewed him. So that's going to be on the Friday show. We'll have a little discussion as well. So hope you tune in for that. So thanks again, everybody. And we will see you again on Friday.
Thanks for listening.